welcome. Welcome, everyone. Yay! We're going to have some fun tonight. Welcome, everyone, to CHM. My name's Lewin, for those that I don't know. I'm the CEO of the museum here, and very early in my business life, I had a little bit to do with this thing, too. So it's a really special night for me personally, and obviously for all of you, or you wouldn't be here. CHM is an amazing institution. I've been here for almost 5 years, a good half of which has been shrouded by the pandemic, but nonetheless, we're coming out strong. We're working hard on a lot of new infrastructure that hopefully will unleash what we're doing to the world at large, at scale. We've retuned the mission of the institution. We're, of course, going to collect and preserve, which is a natural thing for a museum to do, but we're also focused on what we like to say is a mission statement associated with decoding technology, the computing past. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. We all have agency on that front, that's why we're here. The digital present, which is a bit of a moving target, as we all know, and the future impact on the human condition. And I think tonight's program truly exemplifies that in the sense that Lisa and the effort that many of you here in the audience today put into that product development effort is a living, lasting thing. Clearly the product had its moment in time, but the broader implications of computing on the human condition pretty much started here at scale with this group, with this team, and with this product. So I'm very excited about the program. There are many of you in the audience that I know and I'm glad to see again tonight. And for the first time in a long time, I get to play a little bit too later on and tell a story or two. So I'll look forward to that. So with that, let me please introduce Marguerite Gong-Hancock. She's the VP of Innovation and Programming for the museum, and it's her responsibility to kick things off. So Marguerite, thanks.
Thanks, Daniel, and a very warm welcome to each of you. Since we are celebrating Lisa at 40, I want to ask, who is here from the original Lisa team? Raise your hand. All right, listen. Fantastic. That's great. All right, let's add, keep your hands up. Let's add in anybody else who has worked at Apple. Okay, great. A special welcome to each and every one of you, both here on site as well as all of you who are joining us online via live stream. This program is part of CHM's year-long series called The Art of Code. We have different themes that we're focusing on, but one of them that's very special this year is about the art of code. We kicked off in September with Smalltalk at 50. December, we released Adobe's PostScript at 40. Tonight, we have Lisa at 40. And we're releasing historic source code, having events like this, special companion content and community gatherings. What's ahead? We have Ethernet and Alto. So make sure that you sign up on our website so you can subscribe, and you don't want to miss any of these upcoming events. It's such a pleasure to work here at the museum. We have an incredibly passionate team, and I want to acknowledge some of the people who have helped lead the efforts to bring this event to life. David Murphy and Russell Eyrig, Hansen Shu, Al Casso, John Plute, Sarah Beckler, Kirsten Tashev, and many other amazing people. And a special shout out to our partner, The Verge. This year we've been collaborating to explore both the past and the future of tech. Don't miss their new feature article featured on their homepage about the Lisa. So, published today. So, now for tonight's program, here we go. Happy birthday, Lisa. Some say that without the Lisa, there would be no Macintosh. Without the Macintosh, there would be no iPhone, maybe no Windows, too. Apple's innovative Lisa computer transformed how people interact with computers. What was it like before? Who remembers text-based interfaces? What stepping stones contributed to Lisa, like the pioneering work at Xerox PARC? Research, the Palo Alto Research Center. Right? There's Larry Tesler. We remember him and honor him. And then came the Lisa. Her story has so many dimensions: innovative, overpriced, short-lived, but lasting impact. Maybe we could call it Apple's most important flop. Tonight, as we mark Lisa on the 40th birthday, we'll trace her story through 3 segments. First, the birth. Second, her life. And third, the death and afterlife. Since graphics were such a key part of Lisa's story, we'll use images to help illustrate her story along the way. You've seen 2 pictures already that represent computing before Lisa, and along the way we'll zoom in on others that correspond with the people and the stories on stage. Now, come with me and let's step back in time to 1983, to the debut of the Lisa, in this television advertisement featuring none other than Kevin Costner. Yes, that's right. Before Yellowstone, before Dancing with Wolves, and other films, he was pitching a new computer for the office. Let's watch this ad.
At Apple, we understand that business as usual isn't anymore. That's why we make the most advanced personal computers in the world. And why soon, there'll be just 2 kinds of people.
Hi.
Those who use computers.
Yeah, I'll be home for breakfast.
And those who use apples.
Thanks, Kevin, for setting the scene for us. Well, we have quite a few of our own stars here that will be joining us on stage tonight. And as tradition here at CHM, I'll introduce them using 5 numbers. First, our moderator for the whole evening, Katie Hafner. Katie's a journalist and an author. She's host and co-executive producer of the Lost Women of Science podcast. She writes frequently for the Washington Post and the New York Times. She's the author of a memoir, a novel, and 6 nonfiction books. She started at Computer World around the time that the Lisa made her debut. And her first novel, The Boys, was published in 2022, which she mentions in Lisa's closing scenes. Here are her 5 numbers. $182, the weekly pay at her first reporting job at the North Lake Tahoe Bonanza. 4.95 million words, approximately, written over the course of her career, and she's still counting. 21 New York Times obituaries of computer pioneers written since John Pastel died. And one time, we have to hear this story, that she hacked into prison to interview a computer hacker. 10.5 precious years married to Bob Wagner, who is here tonight. Join me in giving a very warm welcome to Katie. So great to have you back on stage, Katie. Joining Katie will be, for this first segment, we'll have a panel, and we're thrilled to feature original Lisa team members who have gathered from many places for tonight. Let's start with Bruce Daniels. At Apple, Bruce started and managed the Lisa software team, and later was lead programmer for the Macintosh. Bruce had also held other roles at Hewlett-Packard, Oracle, Borland, Sun Microsystems, and his own startup, Singular Software, which created software for the Mac. Today, he's a hydroclimatologist focused on water-related impacts of climate change. Here are his 5 numbers. 3333, the street address on Coyote Road of Xerox Park. 35 plus software developers, some of you here tonight, of the Lisa software and app development team. 7 applications of the Lisa software suite. 4 Rosing Rascals, who endowed the Lisa with an intuitive file manager in 1957, was the year that his family left Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Join me in welcoming Bruce. Next, meet Wayne Rosing. Wayne is the engineering director of Apple's Lisa team. He subsequently managed hardware development at Sun Microsystems, then headed the spin-off First Person, which developed the Java platform. Later, he served as Vice President of Engineering at Google and was appointed Senior Fellow at the University of California, Davis. A longtime astronomy hobbyist, in 2005, he founded the Las Cumbres Observatory Global Telescope Network as CEO and its chief engineer. Here are his 5 numbers. 5 years working at Apple on Lisa and the Education Research Group, 54, the age when he joined Google, 32 telescopes placed globally for science and education, 18 more telescopes that are needed to complete the Photon Ranch, and 3.11, the Python version that he uses. Please welcome Wayne to the stage. Turn around.
Little fashion show, huh?
We have a fashion show. It's very important for you to see his Lisa jacket. Last but not least, we're delighted to add John Couch, who will participate via recorded video. John was Apple's 54th employee, the first vice president of software, the first vice president of education, and general manager and VP of the team that developed the Apple Lisa. He's the owner now of the Eden Estate Wines, and some of you enjoyed that tonight at our member reception. And since his retirement from Apple, he's been investing and advising startups in education and technology space. He's also the author of Rewiring Education, as well as the book, My Life at Apple, and The Steve I Knew. Here are his 5 numbers. 1978 was the year he joined Apple, 24 years total working at Apple, 4 books written and music CDs produced, 1, Jesus is number 1 in his life, and 17 is the number of his grandchildren. So John will be joining us as well via video. But first, over to you, Katie. I look forward to this conversation about the birth of Lisa.
Thank you, Marguerite, and thank you, Daniel. And what a wonderful thing when everybody raised their hands, of both those on the Lisa team and those who'd worked at Apple. This is going to be a lot of fun. So before we get right down to it, I thought I'd do a little bit of a sort of generating some warm and fuzzies about the Lisa. And I don't know if anybody has read this book by Frank Rose, West of Eden, which was written in the 80s, and he has a lovely description of the Lisa, a demo of the Lisa for the press at, of course, the Carlisle Hotel, Steve's favorite, in New York. And here's what he wrote. It looked quite dramatic, this Lisa, tan, sleek, and sexy. Its screen cantilevered out over the keyboard and aglow with pictures, file folders, a clipboard, a calculator, a wastebasket. A thin cord led across the tabletop to a palm-sized, quote, mouse that controlled an arrow on screen, the arrow and the mouse moving in one-to-one correspondence, like partners in some electronic tango. The overhanging screen gave it a powerful forward thrust. The pictures and the mouse made it seem as playful and full of pizzazz as a video game. This was no stodgy number cruncher, no clunky contrivance devised for anonymous functionaries in the back office. No, Lisa was everything the name implied: pert, vivacious, friendly. And sitting on that table above Manhattan, it looked as if it could soar.
He got it right.
Right? He got her. And then the second thing is that I, by total coincidence, wrote a novel. I mean, that wasn't a coincidence that I wrote the novel. And it came out in the summer. And at the very last scene, the protagonist, who's a very nerdy, wonderful engineer. He gets on a train on Amtrak from Penn Station. He sees this woman reading a book, and he's trying to drum up the courage to talk to her. And he sees that she's reading this book. It's an ebook, and then he says, "So what are you reading?" To my own ear, my voice sounded much too loud and a half step too high. She looked up. "Total escapist junk," she said. She caught my gaze. "I'm Lisa," she said. "Nice to meet you, Lisa," I replied, completely forgetting to offer my name in return. "You weren't named after a computer by any chance, were you?" I asked on a hunch. "Yes, I was," she said. She told me she was born in 1983, the year the Lisa computer was introduced. Her parents had met while working at Apple. "Good thing you weren't born in 1984, I said. Scarcely missing a beat, she laughed, a delicate chuckle. "You're right. My name would be Macintosh." Our eyes met for a moment, but I was spent. She turned back to her ebook. On that merry note, we would like to hear John Couch give us his thoughts on the Lisa.
Remember, I'm 29 years old at the time. Steve is 20. And we're trying to solve a problem that had never been solved before. And that is, how can someone like my dad, use a computer? I did two things in those days from a leadership perspective. One, I walked the manufacturing floor in the morning because I learned more about the status of the hardware real time than waiting for a report 2 weeks later. And then secondly, we did beer busts on Friday afternoon. And again, it was an opportunity to talk directly to a programmer and better understand where the schedule was and what, the difficulties that they were facing and where I could step in and, and help out with, maybe getting Steve out of the way or in the way, either way. In a sense, the goal of the interface, the user computer interface, was to open a new market, to open a market for people. Because, like Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so, we didn't ask people whether they wanted a mouse. In fact, we were beat up, when we introduced it, because, no knowledge worker is going to take their hands off the keyboard and go to a mouse. Nobody's going to accept these icons on the screen. And I mean, we were told over and over again that we would fail. And yet we believed in the paradigm shift, and we invested, heavily in the paradigm shift. And we did sell 50,000 computers, which, if you do the math, is probably paid for the development, a development that became the foundation of Apple's future.
So Wayne and Bruce, when you hear that, what did it make you think? Did you?
It validates what we did.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. We set out to change the computing industry, and we did. And
you did. So let's go to the very beginning, sort of the manger, as it were. Xerox PARC. And I want to hear about that trip.
I was on that first trip. Just accidentally, I got invited at the last minute. There was a group kind of talking about Lisa, but it was a different thing. And I got invited on the trip, went up there, and it was eye-opening. It was not a product, it was just some ideas and things they've been playing with. But it was interesting to see. That was very, very enlightening of what's possible. And afterwards, Steve asked me to ride back to the Apple with him.
With him in his car?
In his car.
Where was your car?
My car was there at the Xerox PARC. So I had to beg someone to take my car back. So
And it wasn't just you and Steve in the car?
just me and Steve.
And what did he say? Was he?
Well, we just talked about what we'd seen and what the possibilities were and how it could change things if you had all these things bundled up in a product. And you know, it meant that people wouldn't have to learn all kinds of programming languages to use it. They could just sit down and start using it. And that's something we did later on. We brought people in, sat them down in front of Elisa,
Right.
and said, do something, and they would do it, and we'd see what mistakes they made and change it until it got so that people could sit down and use it.
And when you were sitting in that car with him, you thought, okay, this is it. This is the start of something else.
No, because not much happened for 2 months. And then they called me and said, would you like to take over the software group? And then we started changing things.
And so who was there first, you or you?
I was there early first. And then we brought Wayne on.
And then John Couch recruited you, right?
He recruited me. I was at Digital at the time and in charge of what's called mid-range VAX. And on one of our, I guess you'd call it retreats, we showed DEC this thing that we had learned about by reading the papers published from Park. It was this big graphical screen with dots on it. It was a graphical screen, not a green screen. And it had this thing called a mouse. And we had ginned up a trivial bunch of windows so that you could have more than one window, and you could click on a window and get one application. You could click on a window and then another application would come forward. And I proposed that that was called a workstation, and I called it a workstation.
That was you.
That was me. I didn't say I invented the word, but I called it a workstation. And I proposed that DEC make these things and connect them with this thing called the Ethernet. And I proposed this to be a product, and my boss at the time told me, no way, we are a time-sharing company. We are not going to build a product like that.
And you said, I'm out of here?
Literally 2 days later, John Couch called me.
Really?
And I virtually accepted the job over the phone, but the problem was I hadn't interviewed yet. So the next Monday I was out at Apple and interviewing, and that took 2 days, and then the rest is a lot of work.
Let's hear about that work. So I think there's a popular perception that this group went to Park and then sort of did this one-to-one transfer of the Park work and created the Lisa. No, this was something that you actually had to create.
Well, the Park thing was a lot of ideas and some demos. It was not a product. It was, miles away from a product. And someone had to make that. As an example, these windows you see up there, at Xerox PARC, you could have one window, it had to be square, or if you had others, it had to be the one that you're writing to. You can't write to anyone but the top one. Our windows could be circular or triangular, any shape you want. You can write to any of the stack of windows you have. So it was way beyond what Xerox PARC was showing. They showed the idea of a window you could move around on the screen and write to, but that's not what a product is. A product is much more than that. And so we put in all the work to make it, and all the user testing to make sure it really was better.
And tell me about the group. How many people were in it? What was it like? I mean, clearly these were really smart people. And was there a lot of friction? Was there this sense of we are doing something that's never been done?
We had about 35 software people at the end, because you remember, it's not just the operating system. We had 7 applications we shipped with the product. That's revolutionary. I mean, most folks just shipped the hardware, and we had everything. And so it was a lot of people doing a lot of work.
Some of them in this room,
Some of them in this room. The great thing is that we interviewed, of course, all these 35 people. And most companies, you interview people, you make them offers, and you get a bunch of turn downs and a few acceptances. And we had 1 turn down out of 35.
Who was that?
I don't remember. His name is obviously lost in infamy. And so everyone who saw this or heard about it wanted to work on it because they could all see, that's amazing. We can change
Yeah.
the world.
I mean, the fact that people saw that
Yes.
and didn't question it.
Yeah. Later on, I did PR for the thing. So I talked to editors from Newsweek and all those magazines, and some of them had never used a computer. So how do you explain this to them? And yet we could do that and show them, and even they got the concept that, this will really change things.
Yeah, I remember I was working at Computer World in 1983, which does date me. And as if anybody who knows what Computer World is or was, I don't know if it's still around, it was like the mainframe is everything. And this group came in with this Lisa thing and the mouse, and we were, we weren't very imaginative. And we said, what is that thing? And you guys understood it. And just recently I went back and I watched the mother of all demos, the Engelbart demo, and it's there. It's all there. And when you got it, right?
We got it, and it was the mouse was the key thing was the mouse and a graphic interface instead of characters. That changed everything. Because
But what was it? What was it about the way that you knew that people would interact with a machine that would make it so different?
Because all of us had been up the ladder learning command languages to be able to, how do you remove a file? How do you create a file? How do you copy a file from one? It's all this language. And even us would forget, is it rem or rm? Or, when you have multiple files, is it a comma between or a semicolon? And, it's just all these little details. And the first time you take a file, drag it to the the garbage can and drop it in, it just opens up. You see, that's an easy.
Oh, it opened back then?
Well, it had an open already, but it would drop, your thing would drop in the garbage can and be gone. No command language needed. Just take the thing, drag it. In fact, we used to call this a drag and drop interface.
I used to think of it at that time as an object-oriented interface. There's a different meaning in computer science than but it's the same term. It's paper, it's garbage cans, it's a pointer. And I remember early on when I was there, one of the first decisions I got to participate in was choosing the mouse. The original Xerox mouse, I think, had 3 buttons. There was a 3-button prototype, a 2-button prototype, and a 1-button prototype.
And there was an
presented by
right?
Oh, yeah.
Hovey Kelly, I think. Is that right? Hovey Kelly? And I remember looking at it and saying, well, if there's only 1 button, you don't have to make a choice.
Exactly.
And
That prevailed.
that was
Yes.
the 1 button.
Yep.
And to this day,
I
am programmed for a 1-button mouse.
I know.
Yep.
I know.
And I just wish I could get rid of the other button. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe the scroll thing is sort of useful,
Yeah.
but 2 or 3 buttons is just 2 or 3 too many, or 2 or 1 too many.
Yep. That's what the software team decided, was you want it simple and 1 button. You can't make a mistake. There's
Right.
only that 1 button
Just
you can touch.
push it.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Engelbart was,
Yeah, that's right.
that's
Exactly.
basically doing.
That's right.
Yeah, versus Kevin Costner, it's like, what is he doing? Right.
Making money on an app lab.
Oh, yeah, good point. And did you, not to bring up the whole commercial side of things, but why not? There was clearly the Macintosh and the Lisa were kind of running neck and neck. John Couch made a famous bet with Steve about which would ship first. They settled it over dinner, I guess, but the Lisa came out first. Let me ask you a 2-pronged question. When you saw people moving over to Mac, what did it make you think about the prospects for the Lisa. And what did you think about the prospects for the Lisa when it was clear that it wasn't quite catching on?
I always say the biggest mistake for Lisa was bundling everything you could imagine in one price. Even now, you go to buy a computer, your keyboard's extra, probably your mouse is extra, all the software is extra. And to take it all and bundle it for one huge price, just make it sound unreachable.
And did you feel like it was that problem was eclipsing the tremendous?
Yes. What Steve got right was you wanted to get in people's hands.
Yes, right. And just the creativity of what you had done. It was the birth of something really huge. And I've been playing in my mind, like, is it really true that without the Lisa there wouldn't be a Mac? I mean, why couldn't everyone have gone to Xerox PARC and just done the Mac?
I can tell you, because about a year before the Lisa was announced, I'd finished all my, before the Mac was announced, Lisa was announced, I finished all my Lisa duties, and Steve Jobs came to me and says, well, your duties are done. Come over and join my Macintosh team. And I did. And the first day there was a software meeting. And there were a bunch of software folks that I knew, because they'd all been working on the Apple II. And they were sitting there talking about what this new Lisa computer, the Macintosh computer they were working on would do. And they were talking about, well, let's put a basic interpreter in there, and you can go peek and poke on the screen, which is exactly what the Apple II did. And they had no idea of anything we were doing. I brought my prototype of the Lisa. I brought all the documentation of not only the interface, but all the internals. And within a week, that's where they were going.
Oh, wow.
And we had a get together about a year and a half before that of both teams, and all the Mac groups were willing to say, if there had not been a Lisa, there never would have been a Mac. They were honest, because they followed the Lisa, the look and face. You could look at a Lisa back then and a Mac back then, and most folks couldn't tell the difference. There was garbage cans on both sides, there were menus on both sides, there were scroll bars on both sides.
That's a Big Mac.
That's a Big Mac.
That was a Big Mac.
In fact, you couldn't develop for the Lisa for 2 years if you didn't buy a Lisa. Develop for the Mac unless you bought a Lisa. All development had to take place on that because the Mac was a toy at that point.
I see.
The Lisa had a hard disk. It had 2 floppies, not just one. A bigger screen, virtual memory. There was so many things that you want for software development were on the Lisa, and it took years before the Mac got there.
And tell me about the Twiggy.
It was something Apple wanted to do. They wanted to develop their own disk, and they were trying around, and it kind of never worked. But they wanted it to work, and more power to them. But it was clear from very early on that it was going to be a problem.
It was, shall we say, challenging. I think that my analysis of it is that one of the critically different things that happened, the Lisa concept became an office computer for the office with a set of bundled applications, and a really big part of it was printing and getting the printing right. And it was a dot matrix printer in the beginning, but the point is, because it was graphical and you could do graphs and you could do memos with funny little characters in them and all kinds of things, it was created a different thing. But what happened in parallel is IBM came out with the PC. And they came out with a piece of hardware that was cheap, it wasn't expensive, it was open, people were copying it, they enjoyed maybe 6 months of whatever pricing they wanted, and then they were in the PC price wars. But the key thing is, the operating system was open, and it was relatively easy to develop on it, and the software, the development software was there, And so a lot of the business people simply went that way. And by the time Apple came out, the basic market had moved. And then this thing came out, and it was sort of much more Xerox PARC-ish, big system, if you will, almost proprietary, because we made the mistake of not really having an open interface so that other software people could get in. Mm-hmm. And then we came out, then a year later Mac came out, and then we came out with the second version, which had networking and some other things, but it was just too late. Mm-hmm. But the ideas were there. And the other thing I'll say is, quickly, the graphics system in Macintosh was written by Bill Atkinson, and it was the same code in the Lisa. And it was the same printing code.
Right.
So
a lot of folks don't realize like 30% of the code in the Macintosh came from the Lisa.
Right. Yeah.
The printing code, the user memory handling was Lisa code. Just so much of the Mac came not just intellectually, but physically. The bytes were the same.
Yeah, and then of course the Finder, the desktop, was the
Rosing's Rascals.
the last step.
Yeah.
So my last question for you guys, does either of you own a Lisa still?
I just donated mine to the History Museum.
Mm-hmm.
I have one that needs some soldering iron work, and if I can.
Well, I just saw one on
supply.
eBay for $65,000. So we thought $10,000.
That'll be a good tax deduction
Right,
for me,
yeah.
won't it?
Well, when I went to Sun Microsystems, I had a Lisa on my desk for 2 years. That was my machine, because I used the terminal emulator on Lisa to talk to the Sun world.
Right.
And then when I wanted to write a memo or something, I would do it on the Lisa. It's just so much easier.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. That was
Whew.
We are moving now onto the This Is Your Life portion of the program, and Marguerite is going to give us the introductions.
Great. We've heard about the birth. Now, this next segment is kind of an homage to the American TV series, This Is Your Life. So we have Lisa, 3 guests from your life who will come and share their unique stories with you from their own unique vantage points. One about your design, another about the user interface, and last but not least, marketing. So let me introduce our first speaker. Let's next welcome Annette Wagner. Annette's the graphic artist who designed icons and fonts for Lisa. Sounds like you already know who she is. Then later was on Apple Computer's interface team. She later joined Sun and worked on the Java team, and after building a whole portfolio of patents, icons, and all kinds of products, she embarked on a career of broader artistic ventures. So today she focuses as an artist on media like acrylic, watercolor, sculpture, and she has a wide range of interests. So here are her 5 numbers. 1981 was the year she began creating typefaces for the Apple Lisa computer, 21 patents. 2010 was the year she graduated with a master's degree in women's spirituality and became a working artist. 11 years on the faculty of intentional creativity teacher training program, and 9.7 acres that she lives on in Montana. So glad you're here from Montana, Annette. your story.
Annette, you have a story to tell to our.
I do have a story to tell.
Do you recognize?
So, when I was hired in 1981, I was a graphic designer and a typographer. And I was hired along with Elizabeth Hall, who was also a graphic designer and typographer. And neither of us had a clue what we were getting into. And we walked into this office when we got hired that had a daisy wheel printer and a couple of Lisa prototypes. And there was this thing called the font editor that this guy named Jeff Parrish had written. And he explained that what we needed to do is to create these typefaces. They were serif and sans serif, but typefaces that whatever you saw on the screen, that was how they printed out. And he told us that this was called what you see is what you get, or WYSIWYG. And then he told us that the screen had rectangular pixels, and that was when the fun began. There was lots of tweaking back and forth and trying to figure out how to actually make this work, because also a daisy writer, the balls in a like a big ABM Selectric typewriter, they have preformed characters. So it was quite an adventure. The daisy wheel kind of went away fairly quickly, and then the dot matrix made an appearance on the screen. Liz decided that she wanted to run her graphic design studio, and I ended up taking over all of the typeface work. And I was always looking for ways to figure out how to improve what I was trying to deal with here in terms of making these things truly be WYSIWYG. And I remember coming across this article by Charles Bigelow and Holmes. He's a typographer. And in the article, he talked about creating bitmap typefaces that, for a dot matrix printer, that took into account the ink spread. And I remember, having lots of fun going in and tweaking all of the typefaces so that they actually printed very, very cleanly. And that was kind of my life at Apple, back in the Lisa team at that point. And then one day, Jeff walked into my office, and he had this printout of these things that looked like three-dimensional logos. They were kind of awful looking. Sorry, Bill, but that was the truth. And he told me these things were called icons. And I had never seen an icon before in my life. I didn't know what I knew what they were trying to do. They explained the concept of they were going to put these things on the screen so that people could understand what they were looking at. So I made an attempt to, I made an attempt to make the three-dimensionality work, but it doesn't work with rectangular pixels. So the pixels won that battle. And then I flattened all of the icons, and I really made this attempt to design them and tweak them so that they looked like file folders and pieces of paper and charts and graphs and documents. The trash can kind of had a mind of its own, so it looks like what it does. And without my really realizing it, I was helping them implement another aspect of what you see is what you get. Because you see these icons and you see these things on the, on they were actual desktop. It was like you see the things on the computer, you have the things on your desk. And so that was another aspect of that piece of it. And then after I did the icons, oh, that's right, this is the next piece of the story that's actually fun to tell. Then this thing called the laser writer showed up. And this whole concept of what they called outline typefaces. Well, this was a whole brand new world to those of us who were typographers. And so I got flown out to Boston on my very first business trip. And they told me, don't worry about it, you'll have no trouble driving in Boston. And I went out and visited this company called Bitstream, which was a type foundry, and had a conversation with them about outline typefaces. And they said, you want to go back to California and talk to this little dinky company called Adobe and this guy named John Warnock.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, okay. So I fly back home, I tell the engineers all about what I found out on the meeting, and that I need to probably meet with these Adobe people and find out what they're doing. Well, word got back to Steve, and I ended up with a phone call from Steve Jobs where he thoroughly cussed me out because I was stepping into his territory and this was not okay. And
He had territory.
The meeting with Adobe went off. And I ended up with a stack of printouts of all of these typefaces that they had available. They had serif and sans serif, and I wanted them in different sizes so I could evaluate what they were doing. Well, the typefaces were awful. And this is very early on in Adobe's days, and I'll explain. There's a difference in how you handle the X height in a typeface between display sizes and body sizes. That was completely off. The horizontals, the verticals, and the diagonals are supposed to have an even visual weight when you scan across.
Is everybody following this?
So those were completely off. And like an O, they had flat spots in them. And so I was like, well, what do? I don't want to offend these people. And Jeff Parrish was like, no, mark it up. We give it back to them. So I got out my red pen and I marked everything up and I called the sales lady at Adobe and handed it all off to her. And I didn't hear anything for a while. And I went off and designed a brand new system font for the Lisa, the one that's used in the user interface. And that led to a conversation about having Charles Bigelow, or Chuck as we called him, come in for a day of consulting, which was something I was looking forward to. And I went to the train station to go pick him up. And he got off the train and he walked up to me and he said, I owe you a really big thank you. I'm like, what? For what? I hadn't ever met him in person at that point. And he said, you got me an amazing consulting job at Adobe. But it gets better because he apparently spent 6 months at Adobe. And Adobe had gotten back all the feedback from me, and I think I wasn't the only one, but they realized they had a problem. And they got Chuck in there, and that was when they developed the concept of doing font hinting. And it came out of that interaction that I had with them, where they went in and learned how to put hints on those outlines and make them actually what they're supposed to be. But not everything that we did on the Lisa team was work. We had one of the earliest projects that I worked on, and there are a few people in the audience that are wearing these T-shirts, was, as it was mentioned, IBM was kind of one of those things was seen as the big gorilla. So I created a black and white version of the IBM logo, and I took a bite out of it and put a leaf on it and printed it on blue T-shirts. Very tongue-in-cheek. And there are actually some folks here tonight.
Wearing the T-shirt?
We can make them stand up if you want. They can show you the T-shirt. They'll be really annoyed with me. I know that Cliff, there's one over there. Ellie has one on.
Wow.
And Cliff has the other one on.
Yeah, well.
Yes, and the last thing and also the Lisa jackets, I was the one who designed them. Oops, sorry, microphone. It's Wayne's fault that it has all those words on it.
And you had a last thought.
I have a last thought. So one of there's a couple things that we can think of as legacies from the Lisa, looking back at what we did. And one of them is, when you really think about it, we just have a working assumption that any typeface that you see on the screen is going to print correctly when it's on a printer. And that came out of the Lisa. Mm-hmm. That whole idea that you have clean, beautiful typefaces and they just work all the way through. And the other thing that when I go back and I look at where computers are today, and I spent a lot more years after the Lisa project working doing user interface design, is we still have those desktop icons. And Norm Cox, by the way, was the man who designed the original icons on the Xerox Star. I never saw them. I saw them like a year and a half after I designed the Lisa ones. But the icons that I designed on the Lisa, there's still people out there using desktop icons, file folders, even though they don't actually have physical desktops. And I think that piece of WYSIWYG also really impacted how we did user interfaces going forward from that time.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you so much, Annette.
You're very welcome.
Well, Lisa, we have another guest here to talk to you. This person, Bill Atkinson, really wanted to be here tonight, but not as much as he wanted to be on his honeymoon. So he's on his honeymoon right now as we speak, but he did come in specially to the museum and spent hours with us, and from that we've prepared a clip for you of what he wanted to share. But before that, for those of you who don't know him, let me just say a few words. He worked at Apple from 1978 to 1990, served as the developer of the Lisa user interface, QuickDraw, and later part of the Macintosh development team. He also created MacPaint and HyperCard, later co-founded General Magic, and many people know him for his nature photography also. Here are his 5 numbers. He was the 51st Apple employee. 1990 was the year he co-founded General Magic. 157 Polaroid images of the Lisa GUI that have just been added to the CHM collection digitally. Thank you. Thanks to him. And less than 2 weeks was the time that elapsed between meeting Steve Jobs and quitting his PhD program to join Apple. Last but not least, 1 month since he was married. So let's hear some words now from Bill.
Steve Jobs recruited me. My friend Jeff Raskin, that I knew from undergraduate, he said, come down to Apple. There's something really cool starting up. You got to be part of this Apple computer thing. And I said, no way. I got to finish I was working on a PhD in neuroscience. And he sent me round-trip airfare. And my dad lived nearby in Los Gatos. And so I figured, what the heck, I'll spend a weekend. He said, no strings attached, just come and visit. Well, Steve spent the entire day with me. And what he said then is what fired me up. And he said, what you read about in tech news really happened 2 years prior. There's a lag time between when time something's invented and time something's available to the public. If you want to change the world, and he used the phrase make a dent in the world, but he meant it in a good way. If you want to change the world for the better, you have to be ahead of that lag. And then he gave me a visual. He said, think how fun it is to surf on the front edge of a wave and how not fun to dog paddle on the tail end of the same wave. Come to Apple and you can change millions of people's lives. Literally 2 weeks later, I had quit my PhD program. I moved down to Silicon Valley from Seattle, and I was working at Apple Computer. And I knew right from the beginning that what we were doing was going to change the world in a good way. And Steve just sort of put that bug in my head. It was not about making money. It was about doing something useful and beautiful. Steve always talked about our work as art. He said, real artists sign their work. So when the Mac came out, or was about to come out, he had us all sign on a piece of paper with a Sharpie, and then he had that engraved on the inside of the hard tooling. So every Mac had our name on the inside of it. So, he wanted us to take pride in our work and treat it as an artistic expression.
What would you say would be the most significant impact of Lisa?
Maybe the idea that computers were for everyone instead of just for a select group of nerds. That people who had musical inclination or artistic inclination or just anybody could use one of these. It's not just could, but would want to use one. It had to be fun, and it had to be relatively self-teaching, because people don't like to read manuals. So I think computers are now pretty much ubiquitous. A huge portion of people have smartphones in their pocket today. And, Lisa sowed some seeds that contributed toward that trend. I'm not saying that trend wouldn't have happened without the Lisa. Something else would have come along. Sometimes there are ideas in the air, and the right person puts up a catcher's mitt and catches the idea. And if they didn't, somebody else would have caught it. Things would have progressed in that direction. But the Lisa contributed toward the idea that computers were for everyone.
Bill, thank you again and congratulations. Well, our third and last speaker who's come to visit you, Lisa, is our very own CHM CEO, Daniel Lewin. Now, many of you know that long before Daniel, not too long, I'm not going to count how many years, but long before he was president and CEO of the museum, Steve Jobs recruited him to Apple Computer to do the market and channel development work for Lisa as market development manager for the Personal Office Systems Division, POSD. This led him to also define the distribution and market development model for the Macintosh launch to higher education. And his work then led to a career at Microsoft, and his experience across the valley spans Next, Apple, Go Corporation, Sony, and more. So here's 5 numbers for Daniel Lewin. 1976 was the year he came to Silicon Valley on a lost bet. That's a good story. 3.5 inches is the size of the floppy disk that brought him to Apple. 2 is his lucky number. His 2nd grade teacher taught him binary. He has 2 sons and 2 times recruited by Steve Jobs. 4+ years that he served as CHM CEO, and approximately 24,901 miles that he swam during his competitive career as a swimmer, about equivalent of 1 time around the Earth. So please welcome Daniel back now to tell his story.
Daniel,
Okay.
tell us your story.
Okay,
well,
so
tell Lisa your story.
yeah, Lisa, this is the little portfolio that I used in my role. I'm going to confess right up front that I had nothing to do with the product development. It's all of you, Wayne, Bruce, and others that did that work. As was mentioned, I met Steve in April of 1977, the week they left the garage. I was working for Sony in a little sales office next door in the Good Earth complex. And Steve wandered in with a fascination about Sony, which at the time was a 3rd-tier manufacturer in Japan, but #1 in the United States, because they marketed to the US and they focused on design. Even the quality of the paper that the brochures were printed on was fascinating to him, and he spent time wandering in and out of our little office, and it was a 600 square foot office that they had next door. And I don't know if Chris Espinosa's here tonight, but we'll thank him a little bit later on, but he was skateboarding in and out. I think he was 12, I'm not exactly sure. And Mike Marklew was there, and Sherry Livingston all in the beginning of it all, and then Gene Carter wandered in, and those kinds of things. So it was a very, very early time. In 1980, Sony introduced a 3.5-inch floppy, and Steve called. I'd seen him virtually every day prior to that, but they were on Banley 1 at the time, and I walked over, and he wanted to see the product and the material. And the good news for me is the copier in the building was broken. And Pat Sharp, people probably remember Pat, took the materials and was going to go to another building. And so I ended up talking to Steve at some pretty good length. And he was fascinated by the distribution issues. At the time, Apple was selling through distributors, and it was against the law to mail order a computer back then. There were a lot.
Whoa, to send a computer?
You could not send a computer through the mail. You could not buy. I mean, these are the early days of distribution. These are consumer protection laws and things of that ilk, really complicated issues. And Sony had a fairly significant distribution network, and I knew a fair amount about that. So he took my business card, and I didn't know exactly what he was going to do with it, but he gave it to a guy named Joe Roebuck. Joe was working for Gene Carter. People laugh at Joe. He's something else. And so Joe called me and said, hey, I got your business card from Steve. It's probably a good reference, so we should talk. And he and I hit it off. And a week or two later, I came in, Barry Smith, who's in the front. I interviewed with Barry and Trip Hawkins together, and then Gene Carter. And they made me a job offer. And my first day after writing a little program, a basic program in the orientation, first half a day, I ended up in in a room with a one-way mirror in it, and Larry Tesler and others, probably Bruce, I don't know who else was in there, maybe Annette, looking at me, fiddling around with the drawing program on this prototype. And I guess we all get to thank Rich Page, who's over there as one of my co-founders at Next, for the 68,000 and therefore all of the wonderful graphics. But you know, that was a wonderful time for me. The product schedule slipped about a year approximately right after I started. That gave me the benefit of reading all the original work about mice and Windows systems and graphics and all the good stuff. I'm going to thank Barry again for helping me understand what microprocessors did. He'd come from Intel and things like that. So it was a real learning experience, and as was pointed out in my numbers, I knew enough about the math, but decided you know, engineering wasn't going to be for me. I went to a school where there were real mathematicians, and that fooled me right away. By early 1982 or so, there's a woman there, she's since passed, named Joy McCulley. People probably remember Joy. And she was really the lead design in the product group that helped build out what was this sneak preview program. And that's what that graphic is all about. That was a poster. I'm not sure that everyone is familiar with it. There were 400 of them printed. I think I have 3 of them. That one's at my son's house. And it's a likeness or a representation of the Lisa. This sneak preview program that I worked with the product management team and we crafted, it was a full day agenda. Fortune 500 CEO must be present. Others had to be officers, up to 6 total. And this room was designed in such a way that there were 3 bays behind the chairs where they were facing the screen where we were presenting with our foils and things like that. And
just to interrupt, this wasn't any room. This cost $200.
Yeah, it was a $250,000 project to build this room. It was like building a house inside. It was mainly 3 or 3, I think, maybe 4, one of the 2. And yeah, no, yeah, I know I'm kind of going on. You can get me anytime. But it was fascinating to watch, as has been pointed out. These were, you know, Max Hopper from American Airlines and people from big banks and insurance concerns, et cetera. And they were all then turned around mid-morning going into lunch and presented with Lisa Guide. I think that's what it was called. Ellen Knoll, I think she's gone as well, but Greg Steichleither and others had designed this way for people to gain access and interact with the system. So they had to put their hands on a keyboard and a mouse. I wrote the management reports after every one of those because I was the only one consistently in the room every day for all of them. I wore a suit. No one else did. I was in my 20s like everybody else. And I would like to say that, you know, for the most part, the handwriting was on the wall. That their need and desire, they were all IBM shops for the most part. Fortran was pretty fundamental. I think it's already been commented on about what was required to program and build these things. We were talking about SQL. Oracle was in the conversation. They were maybe a $20 million company or something at the time. It was really early, but a fascinating experience. And thankfully, I was given an okay to, under non-disclosure, bring in the university people and researchers who had built all these things in the very beginning. So people from Stanford and Brown University and all these other places, Utah, CMU, MIT. People were coming and visiting, and I would do one-on-one little discussions with people. And so I learned quickly to listen to the market, that all the answers are there. And an eventful day for me personally, and thanks to Lisa, it sort of materialized, was how many people know about Mary Kay Cosmetics? They were the largest Xerox Star installation in the country. And Richard Rogers, Mary Kay's son, came in and for a presentation because it was a great opportunity to share the story. And Steve came into that meeting and in concept described what was going on with Macintosh, didn't show anything off. And after that session is when Steve recruited me to come to the Mac division. There were a dozen or so people approximately. And Joanna Hoffman, I don't know that she's here tonight, but Joanna and I walked around. We're from the same hometown. We hit it off, sort of in the same way. And I ended up in that group thereafter, and maybe a year from now we can talk about that. But I got, very lucky to learn from all of you, the majority, large percentage of people in the audience who are doing these things. And it's like getting a master's in the field. It was amazing.
Well, thank you.
Else? And anyway, that's really what I have. All right. There's one more thing that I want to talk about at the moment before I exit the stage, just to introduce. There's going to be a demonstration of the Lisa that's performed on screen in a little bit. But before we get to that, I want to thank a number of people. Al Kossoff, who's the museum software curator. He's going to be in the video demonstrating the system. And, as most people probably are aware, we released the source code last week. We're very, 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 very thankful to Chris Espinosa for that. So Chris, if you talk he found the floppies. Got a few people to sign off on things, although Chris can do anything he wants. And Al recreated things from the bits and built it. So we can't thank Al enough, and Chris and the rest of the Apple management team for entrusting the Computer History Museum to share the code. It is an academic license, and we're looking for people to live and learn from this. I do believe it's already on GitHub, but please come to our site, offer up your email address in a nice way so that we can know who you are and thank you. But anyway, this is an opportunity for you to see the beginning and the first demonstration of Lisa from the rebuilt code. So please, thanks.
This is a Model 210. It was the last model that was released, has an internal 10 megabyte hard disk in it. And now it's asking what device to boot from. So we'll tell it to boot from the internal hard disk. The machine has 1 megabyte of memory and has a 6 megahertz 68,000 processor. So the system is booted now. This is the power on self-test. So it checks the CPU board, the memory, the I/O board, and any expansion cards. One of the unusual things about Lisa was the system is all document-based. So rather than starting up an application, you go to open up the disk file, and there's a collection of papers, which is stationary for each type of application. Then to create an empty folder, you do the same thing by double-clicking on the folder, and it creates an empty folder. And then you can create forms by taking an example and duplicating it as stationary, so it'll open as stationary rather than as a document. There isn't an Apple icon the way that there is on a Macintosh, so the housekeeping things are sort of scattered into the different menu items. So you can do sort of the same things that you could do in the Finder, in the desktop manager, like display different views of the files, and they call iconic views pictorial views. The date only goes up to 1995. I don't have a battery inside of this machine, so it forgets the time and date. When I unplug it, it has standby power off of the power supply, but if I unplug it, it forgets what time it is. But I've set it to December 7th, 1994, because that maps to the same date. So as soon as that comes up, you can see that knows that it's a Wednesday, even though it has the wrong year.
Thank you, Al, for that demo. Let's say that seeing the Apple Lisa come to life is amazing. 40 years later, isn't it? So let's give a round of applause to all of the people, the original Lisa team, for that amazing innovation. And also for the CHM team. Museums like this place are very special for preserving and restoring these kinds of computer hardware and software. So to the CHM team also. Well, we've talked about the birth of Lisa, your life. Now it comes time for the third part. After a few years on the market, what was the fate of the Lisa machine? To answer that question, our partners at The Verge are creating a documentary tentatively called Lisa's Final Act. It's a story of Lisa's brief, ill-fated second life in the late 1980s. And in this scene, you'll hear from a used computer reseller named Bob Cook, as well as two journalists who broke the story. Let me just mention that it's being produced by Will Poor, and we're thrilled that Will and other Verge team members are here. Welcome. And if by chance you have things to add to the story, they are here and would love to have you talk to them. But let's hear how they tell this part of Lisa's story.
So, 1989, you get this phone call.
They called me and they said, we've decided that we want to exercise our clause in the contract to pick up the computers that we own. And then these guys came and they started loading up trucks.
We ended up getting an anonymous call at the paper.
It was one of the people from the landfill who said, you need to come down and see this.
They were destroying hundreds, if not thousands, of brand new computers. And the first people that we ran into were hired, I guess, by Apple to make sure that the disposal took place as quietly as possible.
They were ex-Marines. I thought that they were henchmen, you know, that had a military objective.
They kind of came off that way. Yeah, they were toughies, there was no doubt.
The trucks are being tilted up. All these computers are dropped down into a hole. Bulldozers are running over them.
Hundreds of brand new computers being run over.
And the guards are on the edge of the hill filming the whole thing.
I remember being shocked at it and just thinking, oh, I want one of these computers. Why can't I have one?
Why do you think that they were so cagey? Well, that was the whole question from the get-go.
I think that they just wanted to get that bad chapter behind them. They didn't want anybody thinking about the computer that failed.
Well, thank you for that sneak peek. There's more to the story. It doesn't end there. They'll be finishing the document and releasing it in just a few weeks. So watch for that from our partners at The Verge. Thanks for that sneak peek. So as we all know, that unceremonial burial was not the end of the Lisa story. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here tonight. The impact has had long, enduring, important significance for the computing industry and for people and users of computers around the world. So next, we turn to this last part, the death and especially the afterlife of Lisa, the broader impact of Lisa, the technology, the business, the societal part of the story. And who better to talk about that than Stephen Levy. We're really thrilled to welcome Stephen back to our stage for a fireside chat with Katie. So let me introduce Stephen. First, let me tell you first that he's Wired's editor-at-large. His previous positions included being founder a back channel and chief technology writer and senior editor for Newsweek. His work has appeared so many places, the Rolling Stone, Esquire, Harper's, Macworld, and many, many other places. A recipient of many awards, he's written notable books on tech people as well as firms. And just 3 years ago, almost to the day, I think, Stephen, he was here on stage talking about his most recent book, Facebook, The Inside Story. So here are his 5 numbers. 40 years reporting on technology. 1984 was the year he published both Hackers and also wrote about Steve Jobs and Macintosh for Rolling Stone. 8 books written, 4 different versions of his book, The Perfect Thing, which is, by the way, about the iPod that he has in chapters that shuffle in like an iPod library. And $50 was the biggest fee that he received for playing a coffee house as a folk singer in college. So let's give a warm welcome to Stephen. Great to have you back. Thanks.
Stephen.
Hi, Katie.
Long time no see.
Yeah. Hey, that documentary was a downer, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Ooh. Okay. Well, should we start with that, or do? Were you surprised? Did you know about that?
I didn't know that that it was wound up in a landfill there. I didn't know that they had that many around at that point, but.
To get rid of.
That's not the legacy.
Yeah, that's not the legacy. So, wow, I think I'm looking forward to seeing that. I hope she wasn't watching. But we do need to talk about, first of all, the reason that the Lisa failed commercially. So, what do you say?
Yeah, well, Wayne and Bruce touched on a couple issues there. I think, first of all, the price was a huge impediment, particularly since it was pretty much on the heels of IBM setting the price for what a personal computer, a computer on the desktop should be.
So the 2 different prices, so the Lisa was $10,000.
Right. Now, Apple, so you think about, go back to 1983, right? The IBM PC had ruled. Business Week put on the cover, IBM wins. The Lisa was always designed, even right before they went to PARC, as this is our experimental computer. So Apple had the Apple II and realized that it had to take something into the future. They built the Apple III, which was a business computer that was supposed to go head-to-head with the IBM PC. And the Lisa was going to be this experimental thing, the computer of the future. And actually, it succeeded, as we're talking about here, pretty wildly at that. We could talk about the legacy a little more. But in 1983, when it came out, as Bill mentioned, Windows had been in the air. And Lisa did some special things, which I'll want to talk about in a second. But we already knew about the Macintosh. And this is, we talked about the rivalry of the Macintosh and Lisa. And Steve Jobs wasn't shy in letting people know that he thought that the Macintosh was going to blow Lisa away. And there was this competition between the teams. So if you're thinking about where the Lisa would go, and thinking about, gee, $10,000 on a computer, and someone else at Apple is saying, we're going to do everything the Lisa does and more at $2,000 they were talking about back then. It became $2,500. There was a thing called the Osborne effect. The Osborne, one of the first computers, it was the size of a suitcase, right? And they came out with a new model, but Adam Osborne, the head of the company, had already announced there was going to be another better model coming down the road, and no one bought the model that was on sale, and that became known as the Osborne effect. So I think there was a little bit of an Osborne effect going on there. And there was something else too, in that at that point, trying to put a computer like that into the IT world, into the corporate world, was a huge challenge. Because at that point, again, they referred to it, these things were unconventional way of doing computing, and it cut against the way IT departments worked. And you look at like Kevin Costner commercial, that guy is not in like an office, he's at the desk. He's, it looks like, he's working remotely from the Boulder, Colorado, or something like that.
With his dog, yeah.
So the IT people looked at that, and they looked at that, and they looked at the price tag, and that was going to be a hard sell. And we live in a world now where the users of computers in the corporate world have more say. The IT people have to give people what they want. And Apple eventually figured out how to do that. When the iPhone came out, a lot of people thought, well, it's never going to beat the BlackBerry. But it turned out that the people using technology had some power. Back then, they had no power. And even if Lisa got in front of people, it would have been a hard sell to get the people who make the buying decisions for these corporations. So that was another thing. And
so where were you when the Lisa, do you remember when the Lisa came out?
yeah, I outed myself 40 years of covering this stuff. So I was writing about technology. I was writing for Popular Computing. And as I said, Windows was in the air back then. In 1983, there was a company called Vision, which came out with like a Windows-like system. Microsoft was talking about its Windows version 1. At the same time, it was developing for the Macintosh. That was another reason, as Wayne pointed out, the Lisa didn't open itself up to developers like the Macintosh did. It came out from the get-go with Microsoft writing software and other popular developers. And I was intrigued by it. People were introduced to the mouse through Lisa and these other things, but particularly Lisa. And I looked into it and thought, gee, the inventor of the system with the mouse, Douglas Engelbart, he might still be around. I should meet this guy. So I went to arrange to interview him, and it turned out he was working at a place called Timeshare, which was just up the street from Banley Drive in Cupertino. You could throw in a Roby from his office, and it would probably land on Banley, where they were like making the Lisas, right? And it was kind of sad. He was the guy who did the mother of all demos, as I named it in my book. And he had come up with those concepts, but he was sitting in a corner of this place, and still arguing that he had the best possible system, but he had missed something. He had missed, the user friendliness of what the Apple people cracked. His mouse had 3 buttons. And he was insistent that a mouse should have no fewer than that. And he had a complicated handset key.
Right,
and
which in the demo he justifies. He said, I need to justify this. Yeah.
But I only came to realize when I was writing Insanely Great, when I wrote the chapter about Lisa, about what that team had done in taking not only concepts of Engelbart, but Xerox PARC, and really jumping a hurdle to make them more useful. We heard a little bit about this, but the Lisa was the first time that you could take those even friendly Windows menus and go past them and actually manipulate things on the screen. And I think that was a tipping point. The Macintosh obviously had it, and they shared, even code. But now we're still grappling with that. You look at the picture of that Lisa interface, it's not that much different than what we see now. And the idea of direct manipulation is something we're still grappling with now. We're all looking forward to augmented reality and virtual reality and other ways that we're going to be able to manipulate things without keyboards and whatever. But that concept of going straight into cyberspace with your hand was done by that Lisa team.
Mm-hmm. And so that's interesting. But
thank you.
As always, you are. But it didn't. I want to pursue this idea of the Osborne effect because clearly there was. One thing that I think about a lot is that Steve, the Lisa, this $10,000 price tag, it was just too much. And then he goes out and starts next with a $10,000 price tag. And at a market that, and so what was that about? What is your insight into that?
Yeah, that was a great irony, wasn't it? That he went back, after leading the Macintosh team, that he went back. And that's what it takes, I guess. If you're doing groundbreaking technology, it's super expensive the first time around. And I think in the same way that it's utterly true that the Macintosh wouldn't have happened without Lisa, is that maybe the Lisa might have survived without the Macintosh. If you think about it, where could the Lisa have gone? If there were no Macintosh, maybe Apple would have felt, gee, now we have to figure out how to make the Lisa less expensive, how to do a version of the Lisa which could be more affordable. And maybe we could open up the Lisa to outside developers. So maybe it was the Macintosh ultimately that blocked the Lisa's continued development.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. People, this resonates. This resonates.
You like that?
Yeah, yeah. And so, speaking of lasting legacies, I mean, here we are. I think many of us, and as I said, I remember seeing the Lisa for the first time when I was just a pup at Computer World, and really wide-eyed, a little confused by the mouse, but I'd never seen anything like it. And what's interesting too is that one's memory, you know how memory plays tricks with you? I could swear Steve came through Framingham, Massachusetts and showed it to us, but single-handedly. I'm sure he wasn't actually there, but I associate that so much with him, even though he was off doing the Mac. So the legacy, just almost this idea that it's this idea that you can see something like what the team saw at Park and walk away and do something with it, rather than just say, oh, that was interesting. And that is, if nothing else, one of the biggest lessons.
No, definitely, and they brought that to all of us. Watching that demo, I was reminded that you saw the menu bar on top of the screen. That was something, and one of many things that the people at Park had not come up with. That was something. There were many things that the folks saw in the demo, and they thought, oh, we can now put this into the Lisa. But when they actually tried to implement it, found it was really difficult to do. It really didn't translate to user friendliness. So when they were grappling with the interface, they had these, used the Xerox way of menus. They were on top of the window, and when you resized the window, it wasn't big enough. And I wrote in my book, it was like cream coming to the top as Bill Atkinson was working on it. They figured out that the menu bar on top, which is part of all our computing existence to this day, came from the Lisa trying to figure out how to take those concepts from Engelbart and Park and make them so everyone could use them in a rigorous way.
And another big lesson, it's in here, I believe.
Hold the book up to the face.
Oh, right.
Very good.
Oh, and you have to tell them what you did with your copy with the signatures too. Okay, but in a minute. What was I saying? Oh, right. And so Bill didn't know that there was something he didn't know you couldn't do.
Right. Yeah. There was a thing. So when you resize the window, this is something that the engineers pondered. That when you had a window blocking the background, were you actually generating the background, or did you have to figure out a way to not have to use all those cycles to do that? So he pondered that and finally came out with a way to not use the cycles and it was called clipping. It was a little complicated, but he figured out how to do it. He called it regions. And one day, Bill was riding in a sports car, and went like a truck had stopped ahead of him, and he like went under the truck in a way that almost could decapitate him. But he only wound up hospitalized. And Steve saw him in the hospital when he came to. And and Bill had to assure him, that not only was he alive, he said, "Don't worry, Steve, I still remember how to do regions."
But I wonder how many of those things there were where the folks on the Lisa team they didn't know it couldn't be done, but they did it.
Yeah. Well, when you have to do something, right?
Yeah, when you
need a
have
deadline.
to
And I think there was this competition there between the two teams, and in some ways they went in different directions. I think Daniel said something interesting when he talked about how colleges might have been interested in the Lisa, but it was so expensive that you almost had to limit it to corporate America, people with the money to pay for it. Whereas the Macintosh team thought we're building like the same thing as like a stereo. The people were excited about stereo equipment, so kids can use a computer, but no kid's going to spend $10,000 for a computer.
So when you wrote Insanely Great, and you have written several books about Apple and Apple products, you did something very creative. You had people sign the book.
Yeah. Well, when I had the book party, there were a lot of people from the Mac team who were at the book party, and they signed a copy of the book. And then I thought I'd take it a little further and get some other people in the book to sign it. At one point, I got Doug Engelbart to sign it. I didn't tell him that I was the one who named it Mother of All Demos. He might have been mad at me, but and I got Bill Gates to sign it. And
well, what did he say? I mean, that must have been interesting. Hey, Bill, sign this book about the Macintosh.
Bill, he signs books regularly. He just okay, he wrote it down. But the white whale was Steve, of course. Steve does not like to sign things. So I timed it very carefully. I was interviewing him about something he wanted to talk about.
What was that?
It was the iPod, and I was doing this big cover story for Newsweek about the iPod, and we had a long interview, and it was a big success. So he was very happy talking about it, and he had a new one coming out. It was great, and we had a great talk. And at the end of it, I pulled the book out. I said, Steve, I got people to sign this book, and he opened it, and he looked at the signatures. And he looked at me like, you bastard. And he signed the book. So I have probably the only book ever that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs have signed.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, this has been really wonderful. I think we've hit our time. What would you? We have an audience filled with people who really think lovingly about this computer, whatever its life and afterlife may be. When you think back on those days, and when you're kind of, everybody here, we were living through history, and you don't even kind of know it, and until it's 40 years later. And what did you think at the time? Did you think this is an incredible time I'm living in, or I need to, what?
Yeah. I mean, if you think back in those days, it was just only a few years where computers went from being something that, as I think Ken Olson might have said it, that people don't need computers on their desks, right? And
in the home, did he say in the home or in the desk? Whatever he said, he was wrong.
The idea that a single person would use a single computer was thought to be like loony, right? And we went from that thought to the idea that maybe, hey, wow, you could do things with it. And there were these evangelists within companies that did spreadsheets, and then the hobbyists moved to people who used it to write, to do the kind of tasks that you do when you have a desk, right? But that was the moment in around that time where computers became something you didn't need a consultant to walk you through. It was something that you could use without a manual, or maybe not too thick a manual. And it was something, now we all have, these things we carry around in our pockets and we're cyborgs. But back then was the time the switch got flipped. And we went from, computers being alien and nerds, for aliens and nerds, to everybody. And this was a big step. And it's great to be in a room with so many people who made it happen.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to thank, we're not done yet. So I want to thank all the speakers, Stephen, Katie. I want to thank Al for painstakingly pulling that bits off the floppy and making it work again. Thanks for the floppies, you gotta love those things. We're here to make a difference, and we'd love to hear your feedback. In Stephen's summary comment, there was this reference to computers being ubiquitous. When I got here, we talked about CHM being the Computer History Museum, and I said, well, I think it's really about computing humanity and meaning, and the lens that we need to think about is what does it mean to be a human in a world that doesn't exist without computing? And as a result of this effort, I think we're all living and breathing this new world that doesn't exist without computing. And as we said, if it wasn't for the Lisa, there probably wouldn't have been a Macintosh. And if it wasn't for, in some ways, I'm going to look at Rich, what he built at Next and that operating system, then Apple maybe would be in the iPod business. I'm not exactly sure, because Next Step is the operating system that's running inside the systems. If you haven't become a member of the museum, please do. You can go to the website and join and click. It can be as little as $15 or more, but we do look forward to your support. I'm going to invite everyone who is part of the Lisa team or who is speaking tonight up on stage right now. All right. We're gonna take a group photo. So this is the History Museum. We need to capture it all. So I'm gonna ask everyone to join us on stage. All right. All right, you got what you need? All right, great. Now, we're almost done. We're not done yet. We got a little video that's going to show up, and we invited John Couch and Bill Atkinson back, and we're going to wish the Lisa happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Lisa.
Happy birthday, Lisa.
All right. And now we have one more thing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Brennan-Jobs. Happy birthday to the Lisa computer. I'm sorry I can't be there today. I'm in New York. We all know that the Lisa computer is named the locally integrated software architecture computer. And so it's such a crazy coincidence that we share a name. Happy 40th birthday to the Lisa.
All right. You coming up? Oh. All right, so now everyone.
Singing happy birthday to Lisa. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lisa. Happy birthday to you. Blow it out.
All right, well, thank you all so much. You gave me so much over the years for what you built, so thank you all so much, and thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed the program. Great.